I, 26F, was sitting in my small apartment when the phone rang. The screen showed a name I had not seen in years, a name that made my stomach tighten into a cold, hard knot. It was Carol, my stepmom. My father had died 4 days ago. 4 days, and now she was calling. My hand trembled as I swiped to answer. I brought the phone to my ear but said nothing. I waited for her to speak first. I always waited for her to speak first. Her voice was exactly as I remembered it. It was thin and sharp, like a shard of glass. "Amy, it's Carol," she said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, a demand for my attention. "I know," I said. My own voice sounded distant to me, like it was coming from across the room. "I need you to come to the house tomorrow," she continued. There was no, "How are you doing?" There was no, "I am so sorry for your loss." There was only the need. Her need. "There are things that need to be sorted. Your father's things. Your old things from your room. We need to get everything in order." I felt a surge of something hot and bitter in my chest. In order. My father was gone. Nothing was in order. Nothing would ever be in order again. But I knew better than to argue with her. Arguing with Carol was like punching a wall. You only hurt yourself. "Okay," I said. The word was small and weak. "Be here at 10 in the morning," she said. "Don't be late. There is a lot to do." Then she hung up. She did not say goodbye. She never did. I stared at the phone for a long time. The silence in my apartment felt heavy, pressing down on me. My father, Mark, was a good man. He was kind and gentle, and he had a laugh that could fill a whole house. But he had a blind spot. A blind spot the size of a person. That person was Carol. He had married her 5 years after my mother passed away. I was 16 then. From the very beginning, Carol had worked to push me away, to isolate me from my own father in my own home. She was a master of subtle cruelty. She would make comments about my weight in front of my friends. She would accidentally throw away a school project I had worked on for weeks. She would tell my father stories about my supposed disrespect, twisting my words until I sounded like a monster. And he, wanting peace in his house, believed her. He would look at me with such disappointment in his eyes. That was the worst part. The look in his eyes. By the time I left for college, my relationship with my dad was strained. I called him, but Carol often answered. She would say he was busy, or resting, or out. The calls became less frequent. I felt like I was losing him piece by piece long before he got sick. Now he was gone. And she was still there. In his house. In my childhood home. The house where my mother had painted the walls of my bedroom with yellow sunflowers. The house where my father had taught me how to ride a bike in the driveway. Carol had always hated that house. She hated the memories of my mother that lived in every room. She had spent years trying to erase them, repainting the walls, replacing the furniture. And now she was calling me to come and sort through the last remaining pieces of my past. It felt like a final act of erasure. The next morning, I drove to the house. It looked the same from the outside, but it felt different. It felt empty. I walked up the driveway, my heart pounding in my chest. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door. Carol opened it. She was dressed in black, but it looked like a costume. Her makeup was perfect. Her hair was perfectly styled. She looked like she was playing the part of a grieving widow, but her eyes were cold and assessing. They held no grief, only impatience. "You're here," she said. "Good. Let's get started." She led me inside. The house was spotless, too spotless. It felt sterile, like a hotel. All the family photos that used to line the hallway were gone. The only picture left was a large, framed portrait of her and my father from their wedding day. In the photo, my father was smiling, but his eyes looked tired. "Your things are in the attic," she said, pointing to the ceiling. "All that childhood junk. I had it moved up there years ago to make space. You can start there. I have boxes." She did not offer me a glass of water. She did not ask me if I was okay. She just pointed me toward a ladder and a task. I felt a familiar sense of resignation wash over me. This was how it always was with her. I was not a person. I was a problem to be managed. I pulled down the attic ladder and climbed up into the dusty heat. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and forgotten things. My whole childhood was packed away in cardboard boxes. Dolls I had loved, books I had read 100 times, school projects covered in glitter and glue. It was all just junk to her. I started opening boxes, a wave of sadness washing over me with each one. I found a box of my mother's old letters. I found my father's high school yearbook. And then I found a box that was not mine. It was a heavy banker's box, tucked away in a dark corner. It had my father's name written on the side in his familiar, neat handwriting. "Personal papers," it said. I felt a prickle of curiosity. I opened the box. It was filled with old financial documents, tax returns, and bank statements. It looked like it had been gone through recently. The files were messy, out of order. That was not like my dad. He was meticulous. I started sifting through the papers, not sure what I was looking for. And then I saw it. It was a life insurance policy document. It was new. The date on it was only 6 months ago. My father had been sick for the last year, but he had seemed to be getting better 6 months ago. I read the details of the policy. The payout was huge, far more than I would have expected. My heart started to beat faster. I scanned down to the beneficiary section. My name was not there. His sister's name was not there. The sole beneficiary was Carol, and her son from her first marriage, a man my father barely knew. I felt the air leave my lungs. It made no sense. My father had always told me that I would be taken care of. He had an old policy, one he took out when I was born. My mother and I were the beneficiaries. After she died, he had made me the sole beneficiary. I had seen the paperwork myself years ago. What was this new policy? Why would he change it? Why would he include her son, but not me? A cold dread spread through me. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Carol's rush to get me to clear out the house suddenly felt sinister. She wasn't just cleaning. She was hiding something. I quickly took a picture of the policy document with my phone. Every page. Then I carefully placed it back in the box, trying to make it look untouched. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I could not let her know I had found it. This was a secret. A secret she did not want me to know. I spent the rest of the day in the attic, pretending to sort through my things. I packed a few small boxes with things I couldn't bear to leave behind. A stuffed animal. A book of photos. Every sound from downstairs made me jump. I could hear her on the phone, her voice low and urgent. She was making plans. Moving forward. Wasting no time. When I finally came down, she was waiting for me at the bottom of the ladder. She glanced at the small boxes in my hands with disdain. "Is that all?" she asked. "I was hoping you would take more. I need the space." "This is all I want," I said, my voice steady. I would not let her see how shaken I was. "Fine," she said, turning away. "Just put them in your car. I have an appointment to get to." As I walked out the door, she called after me. "The funeral is on Friday. Try to wear something appropriate. We don't want a scene." A scene. That's all she cared about. Appearances. What the neighbors would think. What her friends would say. She was not mourning my father. She was managing an event. I drove away from the house, my mind racing. The insurance policy. The rush. The coldness in her voice. It all pointed to something ugly. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew I had to find out. For my dad. He deserved better than this. He deserved to have his memory protected from the woman who was already trying to erase him. The first person I called was my best friend, Sarah. She had known me since kindergarten. She had seen Carol's cruelty firsthand. She answered on the second ring. "Amy, are you okay? How did it go?" she asked, her voice full of concern. "I'm not okay," I said. And then the words came tumbling out. I told her about the phone call, the attic, the box of papers, and the insurance policy. I sent her the pictures I had taken. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Sarah said, "Oh, Amy, this is bad. This is really, really bad." "I know," I whispered. "What do I do?" "You need to be smart," she said, her voice firm. "You can't let her know you suspect anything. You need to gather information. Quietly. Do you know who your dad's lawyer was?" I thought for a moment. "I think so. A man named Mr. Peterson. Dad mentioned him a few times." "Okay," Sarah said. "That's your first step. You need to call him. You need to find out about your dad's will. And you need to do it before she does." Her words cleared my head. She was right. I couldn't just be sad or angry. I had to be strategic. Carol had been playing a game for years. Now, I had to learn the rules. And I had to win. The next morning, I found the number for Mr. Peterson's law office online. I called and made an appointment. The receptionist was kind. She expressed her condolences for my father's passing. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to me. It was more kindness than my own stepmother had shown me. My appointment was for the following day. I spent the rest of the day in a haze of anxiety and grief. I kept looking at the pictures of the insurance policy on my phone. The signature looked like my dad's, but it was shaky. Weak. Not the strong, confident signature I knew. I thought about when it was signed. 6 months ago. He had been in the hospital for a few days then. A bad spell. Carol had been by his side the whole time, she had told everyone. She had made sure no one else visited, saying he needed his rest. At the time, I thought she was being protective. Now, it felt like she was isolating him, guarding him. The next day, I went to Mr. Peterson's office. He was an older man with kind eyes. He had been my father's lawyer for over 20 years. He knew my mother. He remembered me as a little girl. "Amy, I am so sorry for your loss," he said as I sat down. "Your father was a wonderful man." Tears pricked my eyes. "Thank you," I said. "He was." "What can I do for you?" he asked gently. I took a deep breath. "I need to know about my father's will," I said. "Carol, his wife, is the executor, I assume, but I have some concerns." Mr. Peterson's expression became serious. He steepled his fingers and looked at me over the top of them. "Your concerns are not unfounded," he said slowly. My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "Your father did have a will," he said. "One we drafted together many years ago. In that will, you were the primary beneficiary. The house, his savings, everything was to go to you, with a small provision for his sister." "I thought so," I said. "That's what he always told me." "However," Mr. Peterson continued, his voice grave, "a new will was filed with my office 2 months ago. It was drafted by a different lawyer. It names Carol as the sole executor and the primary beneficiary of the entire estate. You are left a token amount. $10,000. The room started to spin. 2 months ago. He had been so sick then, barely able to speak some days. "A new will?" I stammered. "But he wasn't well. He couldn't have—" "The will appears to be legally sound," Mr. Peterson said. "It is signed and notarized, but the timing is troubling, as is the drastic change from his long-standing wishes." "There's more," I said, my voice shaking. I pulled out my phone and showed him the pictures of the life insurance policy. He studied the images, his brow furrowed. "This is also new to me," he said. "The policy he held for years named you as the beneficiary. This is a different company, a different policy altogether. And the beneficiaries? This is highly irregular." "What can I do?" I asked, my voice pleading. She is trying to erase me. She is trying to take everything. Contesting a will is difficult, he warned. You need proof. Proof that your father was either not of sound mind when he signed it, or that he was under undue influence. Undue influence, I repeated. The words fit perfectly. Carol's entire relationship with my father had been one of undue influence. Yes, he said. It means someone used their position of power or trust to manipulate him into changing his will for their own benefit. It is very hard to prove. I think I can prove it, I said, a new resolve hardening inside me. I just need to know where to start. Mr. Peterson looked at me, a flicker of something like admiration in his eyes. First, we need a copy of his medical records from the time the will was signed. As his daughter, you have a right to request them. We need to see what his condition was, what medications he was on. Second, we need to identify the notary who witnessed the signature. And third, we need to find the lawyer who drafted this new will. He wrote down a list of steps for me. As I left his office, I felt a strange mix of terror and determination. The grief for my father was still a raw, open wound. But now, it was mixed with a cold, clear anger. Carol had underestimated me. She had always seen me as a weak, emotional child. She was about to find out how much I had grown up. That night, I called my Aunt Susan, my father's sister. I had always been close to her, but in recent years she had grown distant. She was one of the people who believed Carol's stories about me. She thought I was a difficult, ungrateful daughter. Amy, dear, she said, her voice full of a practiced sympathy. I was going to call you. How are you holding up? I'm not doing well, Aunt Susan, I said honestly. I went to the house. Carol is already clearing things out. Well, she is grieving in her own way, Susan said dismissively. We all have our own process. You should try to be more understanding. I bit back a sharp retort. I needed her on my side. Or at least I needed her not to be actively against me. I'm trying, I said. But I am worried about some things. Dad's will, for example. Did he ever talk to you about it? There was a pause. A little, she said cautiously. He told me he had made some changes recently to make sure Carol was taken care of. It's what any good husband would do. Did he tell you what those changes were? I pressed. Did he tell you he wrote me out of it almost completely? The silence on the line was heavy. Oh, Amy, she sighed, a familiar note of exasperation in her voice. You can't be thinking about money at a time like this. It's so unseemly. Your father loved Carol. He wanted her to be secure. You are a young woman. You can make your own way. Her words were like a slap in the face. It wasn't about the money. It was about my father's love. The will, the real will, was the last promise he had made to me. A promise to take care of me as he had always done. And Carol had stolen it. This isn't about money, Aunt Susan, I said, my voice trembling with suppressed anger. This is about what is right. Dad would never have done this to me. Not if he was in his right mind. Don't you dare suggest that Carol did anything wrong, she snapped. She was a devoted wife to your brother. She cared for him day and night while you were off living your life. She deserves everything she gets. Now I have to go. I will see you at the funeral. She hung up. I sat there, the phone buzzing in my hand, feeling more alone than ever. Aunt Susan was not an ally. She was an enabler. She saw what she wanted to see, a grieving widow and a greedy stepdaughter. Carol had done her work well. She had poisoned my family against me. But her words had given me something, a piece of the puzzle. She was a devoted wife. She cared for him day and night. Carol had been his primary caregiver in those last few months. She had controlled who he saw, who he spoke to. She had controlled his medication. She had controlled everything, and in that control, she had found her opportunity. The funeral was a surreal experience. It was a performance directed by Carol. She stood at the front of the room, dabbing at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. People came up to me, murmuring their condolences, but their eyes kept flicking over to Carol, the star of the show. I felt like a ghost at my own father's farewell. Aunt Susan gave me a brief, cold hug. "Be strong," she whispered, as if I were the one putting on a performance. After the service, there was a reception at the house. I didn't want to go, but I knew I had to. I had to watch her. I had to listen. I stood in a corner of the living room, watching Carol move through the crowd. She was a picture of graceful sorrow. She would touch someone's arm, her voice low and sad. "He was my everything," she would say. I don't know how I'll go on. But I saw the quick, sharp glances she gave around the room. I saw the way her smile never quite reached her eyes. She was not grieving. She was networking, solidifying her position as the poor, tragic widow. A woman I didn't know came up to me. "You must be Amy," she said. "I'm Martha, your father's neighbor from across the street." "It's nice to meet you," I said. "Your father was a lovely man," she said, her eyes kind. "He was always so proud of you. He used to show me pictures you sent from college." My heart ached. "He was a great dad," I whispered. Martha leaned in closer, her voice dropping. "I don't want to speak ill of the bereaved," she said, nodding towards Carol. "But things were tense over there these last few months. I heard them arguing a lot." Loudly. My ears perked up. "Arguing? About what?" "Money," she said simply. "I heard him yelling one night. He said, 'It's for my daughter, Carol. It's always been for my daughter.' And she was shouting something back, but I couldn't make out the words." A chill went down my spine. "When was this?" I asked. "About 2, maybe 3 months ago," Martha said. "Right before he got really sick again. After that, the house was always quiet. Too quiet." Her words were a gift, a piece of proof. A crack in the perfect facade Carol had built. My father had fought for me. He had tried to protect me, but he had been sick and she had been relentless. "Thank you for telling me," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "It means a lot to hear that." "Of course, dear," she said, patting my arm. "You just take care of yourself." As she walked away, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I was not just fighting for a house or for money. I was fighting for my father's last words, the ones he had shouted in the night. "It's for my daughter." The day after the funeral, I started my real work. I followed Mr. Peterson's list. First, the medical records. I went to the hospital and filled out the paperwork. They said it would take a few days to process the request. Next, I needed to find the lawyer who had drafted the new will. His name and address were on the document Mr. Peterson had shown me. The office was in a small, shabby building in a different town. It did not look like the kind of place my father would have chosen. I decided to pay him a visit. I didn't have an appointment. I just walked in. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Slate, was surprised to see me. He was a nervous man with shifting eyes. "I'm Amy Parker," I said, "Mark Parker's daughter." His eyes widened slightly. "Oh yes, my condolences," he said, not meeting my gaze. "I have some questions about the will you drafted for him," I said, keeping my voice calm and even. "I'm afraid I can't discuss a client's business," he said quickly. "Attorney-client privilege." "My father is dead," I said. "And I believe his will was the result of undue influence. I am prepared to contest it in court. And when I do, your name will be a part of the proceedings. Your professional conduct will be examined. So you can either talk to me now, or you can talk to my lawyer in a deposition." I was bluffing, mostly. I didn't know if I could really do all that. But my voice sounded confident. It sounded like I knew what I was talking about. Mr. Slate started to sweat. "Look," he said, lowering his voice. "His wife, Mrs. Parker, she came to me. She said her husband was too ill to travel and he wanted to update his will. She brought me all the information. I just drafted the document according to her instructions. Did you ever meet with my father alone? I asked. He hesitated. No, he admitted. She was always in the room. She said he was hard of hearing and she needed to help him understand. And the notary? I asked. Did you provide the notary? Yes, he said. A woman we use frequently. He gave me her name. I had what I needed. He was a lazy, corner-cutting lawyer. He hadn't followed proper procedure. He had allowed an interested party, Carol, to be present during the entire process. He had not taken any steps to ensure my father was acting of his own free will. He was a weak link, and I would use him. The medical records arrived a few days later. I sat at my kitchen table, my hands shaking as I opened the thick envelope. I read through the doctor's notes, the nurse's logs, the medication charts. And there it was. On the exact date the new will was signed, my father had been prescribed a powerful combination of painkillers and sedatives. The doctor's notes described him as confused and disoriented. The nurse had written that he was not fully lucid. There was no way he could have understood a complex legal document. There was no way he was of sound mind. I felt a wave of triumphant rage. This was it. This was the proof. This was the weapon I would use to take back what Carol had stolen. I called Mr. Peterson immediately and told him everything. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "This is very strong, Amy. Very strong indeed. With the neighbor's testimony about the arguments, the lawyer's unprofessional conduct, and these medical records, we have a very powerful case." "So what's next?" I asked, my heart hammering in my chest. "Next, we wait for the will to be officially filed for probate," he said. "Carol will have to do that soon. Once she does, we will file our objection. We will demand a hearing, and we will present our evidence." He paused. "This will get ugly, Amy," he warned. "She will not give up without a fight." "I know," I said. "I'm ready." The call came a week later. It was from Carol. Her voice was dripping with false sweetness. "Amy, dear," she said, "I have some wonderful news." I stayed silent. "Your father's will has been settled," she chirped. "He was so generous. He left you a lovely little sum. $10,000. Isn't that thoughtful?" She was gloating. She was rubbing my nose in it. She thought she had won. "I'll have my lawyer send you the check," she continued. "I am selling the house, of course. It's far too big for just me. I'm thinking of moving somewhere warmer. Arizona, perhaps?" She was moving fast. Selling the house, liquidating the assets, getting ready to run with the money. "Don't sell the house," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. She laughed, a high, brittle sound. "Oh, darling, it's not your decision to make. It's my house now. Your father made sure of that." "No," I said, and now my voice was cold and hard as steel. "He didn't. I'm contesting the will, Carol." The line went dead silent. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, the shock, the anger, the disbelief. "You're what?" She finally spat, the sweetness gone from her voice, replaced by pure venom. "I'm contesting the will," I repeated, on the grounds of undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. I used the legal terms Mr. Peterson had taught me. They felt good in my mouth. They felt powerful. "You have no proof," she hissed. "You are just a spoiled, greedy little girl, just like I always told your father you were." "I have proof, Carol," I said calmly. "I have medical records. I have witnesses. I have a very good lawyer. So I'm telling you again, do not sell my father's house." "You will regret this," she seethed. "I will fight you. I will drag your name through the mud. I will make sure everyone knows what a horrible daughter you are." "You can try," I said, "but the truth has a way of coming out. I'll see you in court." I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking, but not from fear. It was from adrenaline. The fight had begun. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I had a chance to win. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal preparations. I met with Mr. Peterson several times. We went over the evidence again and again. He deposed Mr. Slate, the lawyer who had drafted the new will. Under oath, Mr. Slate admitted that he had never spoken to my father alone, and that Carol had been the one to give him all the instructions. It was a huge victory for our case. We also deposed the notary. She was a nervous young woman who admitted she had only been in the room for a few minutes. She said my father had seemed tired and weak, and that Carol had guided his hand as he signed the document. Another nail in Carol's coffin. Carol's lawyer, in turn, tried to paint me as a gold-digging, estranged daughter. They brought up the fact that I hadn't visited my father often in his final year. I had to explain, in a painful deposition, how Carol had made it impossible for me to visit, how she had lied and said he was sleeping, or that he didn't want to see anyone, how she had systematically cut me off from him. It was humiliating and heartbreaking to have to lay bare my family's private pain for a room full of strangers. But with each step, I felt stronger. I had the truth on my side. And I had my father's memory to fight for. Aunt Susan called me after she was deposed. Her voice was different this time. It was small and shaky. "They asked me about the arguments," she said. "The ones you told me about. I had to admit that your father had called me once, upset. He said Carol was pressuring him about money. Why didn't you tell me that before?" I asked, my voice flat. I didn't want to believe it," she whispered. "I wanted to think the best of her, for your father's sake." "Believing the best of her hurt him," I said, and it hurt me. There was a long silence. "I'm sorry, Amy," she said finally. "I was wrong." It was the apology I had wanted to hear for years, but it felt hollow. It had come too late. "I know," I said, and I ended the call. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. It wasn't a full trial, but a preliminary hearing where a judge would review the evidence and decide if my contest had merit. If he ruled in my favor, we would either go to trial or, more likely, Carol would be forced to settle. I walked into the courtroom with Mr. Peterson. I saw Carol sitting at the other table with her lawyer. She looked pale and drawn. The mask of the grieving widow was gone. Now she just looked like a cornered animal. She shot me a look of pure hatred. I met her gaze and did not look away. I was not afraid of her anymore. The hearing began. Mr. Peterson laid out our case step by step. He presented the medical records, highlighting the notes about my father's confusion and lack of lucidity. He presented the deposition from Mr. Slate, the lawyer, admitting his own negligence. He presented the deposition from the notary, describing how Carol had guided my father's hand. Then he called his final witness. It was Martha, the neighbor. She walked to the stand, looking nervous but determined. She told the judge about the arguments she had overheard. She repeated my father's words, the ones that had become my mantra. "It's for my daughter, Carol. It's always been for my daughter." Her voice rang out in the quiet courtroom. The judge was listening intently, his expression grim. When it was Carol's lawyer's turn, he did his best to discredit our evidence. He said my father had good days and bad days. He said Martha had misheard the argument. He said I was just a bitter daughter who was upset about being cut out of the will. But his arguments were weak. They were full of speculation and conjecture. We had facts. We had documents. We had witnesses. After both sides had presented their case, the judge looked at Carol. He looked at her for a long, silent moment. "Mrs. Parker," he said, his voice stern, "the evidence presented here today is deeply disturbing. It suggests a pattern of behavior that is, at best, unethical, and at worst, predatory." He turned to her lawyer. "I would strongly advise your client to consider a settlement," he said, "because if this case goes to trial, I do not believe it will go well for her. In fact, I would be inclined to refer this matter to the district attorney's office for an investigation into elder financial abuse." The color drained from Carol's face. She looked like she had been struck. The threat of criminal charges was not something she had anticipated. Her lawyer leaned over and whispered frantically in her ear. The judge called for a recess. We went out into the hallway. Within minutes, Carol's lawyer approached us. "My client is prepared to make an offer," he said, his voice tight. "We are not interested in offers," Mr. Peterson said firmly. "There is only one acceptable outcome. The new will is to be declared invalid. The previous will, the one that names Amy as the primary beneficiary, is to be reinstated as your father's true last will and testament." Carol's lawyer looked at him, then at me. He nodded curtly. "Give me a moment," he said, and he walked back to his client. We stood there waiting. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This was it. The moment of truth. He came back a few minutes later. His face was grim. "She agrees," he said. A wave of relief so powerful it almost brought me to my knees washed over me. It was over. I had won. We went back into the courtroom. The lawyers presented the agreement to the judge. He approved it. It was official. The fraudulent will was gone. My father's true wishes would be honored. As we were leaving the courthouse, I saw Carol. She was standing alone, her lawyer having already abandoned her. She looked small and defeated. She saw me and started to walk towards me. "I hope you're happy," she snarled, her voice a low hiss. "You've destroyed everything." "You destroyed everything, Carol," I said, my voice steady and clear. "You did this to yourself. You were so greedy, so desperate to erase me that you couldn't see what you were risking." "Your father loved me," she said, her eyes welling up with tears, but they were tears of rage, not sorrow. "Maybe he did," I said, "but he loved me too. And you tried to steal that. You tried to steal his memory, but you failed." I turned and walked away. I did not look back. I did not want to see her face ever again. The weeks that followed were filled with a different kind of legal work. The process of settling the estate according to the old will. It was complicated, but it was straightforward. I was the executor now. I was in charge. I had to go back to the house. My house now. It was strange to walk through the doors, knowing that it was mine. It still felt empty. It still held the ghost of Carol's cold presence. But I knew that, in time, I could make it feel like home again. I started the process of clearing out her things, her clothes, her furniture, her perfectly curated life. I packed it all into boxes. I hired a moving company to take it to a storage unit. I would send her the bill. One day, while cleaning out a closet, I found a small locked box. I broke it open. Inside was a collection of jewelry, and at the bottom I found my mother's wedding ring. Carol had told me it was lost years ago. She had lied. She had kept it hidden away. Another piece of my mother she had tried to possess and control. I slipped the ring onto my finger. It was a perfect fit. It felt like a piece of my past had been returned to me. Aunt Susan called again. She wanted to have lunch. She wanted to reconnect. I told her I wasn't ready for that. "I need some time, Aunt Susan," I said. "You have to understand. The hurt doesn't just go away because you say you're sorry." She was quiet, but she accepted it. Maybe in time we could rebuild something. But it would be on my terms now. I sold some of the furniture Carol had bought and used the money to buy new things. Things that I liked. I painted the walls of my old bedroom. I chose a bright, cheerful yellow, the color of sunflowers. I hung the old family photos back up in the hallway. Pictures of me and my dad. Pictures of my mom. Pictures of the three of us together. Slowly, painstakingly, I was bringing the house back to life. I was filling it with my own memories, my own hopes. I was reclaiming my home. One afternoon, I was sitting in the living room, a box of old photos on my lap. I found a picture of my dad, taken years ago before Carol. He was laughing, that big, wonderful laugh that I miss so much. He looked so happy, so free. Tears streamed down my face. But they were not just tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of gratitude. I had fought for him. I had honored his memory. I had made sure that his love for me was the last word. The phone rang. It was Sarah. "How are you doing?" she asked. "I'm doing okay," I said. And for the first time in a long time, it felt true. "I'm home." It wasn't just about winning a house or an inheritance. It was about taking back my own story. For years, Carol had tried to write me out of it, to make me a villain, a footnote. But in the end, I was the one holding the pen. And I was just getting started on my next chapter. The process of truly settling in was longer than I expected. Every drawer I opened, every closet I cleaned, felt like an archaeological dig through layers of my family's history. There was the top layer, Carol's sterile and impersonal additions. Then there was the layer of my father's life with her, a period marked by things that felt like a compromise. And beneath all that, like finding a lost city, were the remnants of my life with my parents, my real family. One Saturday, I was clearing out the garage. It was the one place Carol had mostly ignored. It was my dad's domain. His workbench was still there, covered in a thin layer of sawdust. His tools were hung neatly on a pegboard. I ran my hand over the handle of a hammer he had used 1,000 times. The wood was smooth and worn. It felt like shaking his hand. In a dusty cabinet, I found a box labeled Projects. Inside were half-finished birdhouses, a wobbly bookshelf he had been making for me, and a collection of old photo albums he had been meaning to organize. I spent the whole afternoon on the garage floor, flipping through the pages. There were pictures of my parents' wedding, my first birthday, family vacations to the beach. In every photo, my dad's smile was genuine. His eyes were bright. This was the man I remembered. The man Carol had tried to bury under years of control and manipulation. Seeing those photos solidified something in me. My fight had been about more than just a will. It had been a rescue mission. I was rescuing my father's memory from the distorted version Carol had tried to create. She had wanted to be the final chapter of his life, the most important one. But I was making sure that his whole story was told. The legal loose ends took a few more months to tie up. Carol, through her lawyer, tried a few last-ditch efforts to claim certain assets. She argued that a car was a gift to her, that some artwork belonged to her family. Mr. Peterson handled it all with a cool efficiency. He produced receipts and documents my father had kept, proving ownership. Each attempt she made was shut down. It was like watching a cornered snake strike at shadows. It was pathetic. Finally, a large check arrived at my house. It was the payout from the old life insurance policy, the one my father had taken out for me all those years ago. Staring at the number on the check, I didn't feel elation. I felt a profound sadness. It was the value he had placed on my future, a future he wouldn't get to see. I knew what I had to do with it. I opened a savings account and deposited the entire amount. I wouldn't touch it. It was my father's final gift to me, and I would treat it with the respect it deserved. It was my safety net, the one he had always intended for me to have. One day, I got an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Martha, the neighbor. She wrote to say how glad she was to see lights on in the house again, to see my car in the driveway. She said it felt like the neighborhood had gotten its heart back. She invited me over for tea. I went the next afternoon. We sat in her cozy kitchen, and she told me stories about my dad, how he used to help her with her garden, how he would always stop to chat when he was walking the dog. She painted a picture of him that was vibrant and kind, a man who was loved by his community. "You know," she said, stirring her tea, "that woman was like a storm cloud over this street. After she moved in, everything changed. Mark stopped coming outside as much. He seemed smaller. I'm just so glad you were strong enough to stand up to her." "I did it for him," I said. "I know," she replied, smiling. "And he would be so proud of you." Her words were a balm on a wound I didn't even know was still so raw. To have someone see the truth, to have my actions validated by someone who had no stake in the outcome, It was incredibly healing. Life started to find a new rhythm. I was working from home, so the house was not just a place to sleep, but my whole world. I planted a garden in the backyard, just like my mom used to have. I started cooking in the kitchen, filling the rooms with the smell of baking bread and roasting chicken. The house began to feel less like a museum of the past and more like a living, breathing home. My home. I even started to see Aunt Susan again. Our first meeting was awkward. We met at a neutral coffee shop. She apologized again, more sincerely this time. She admitted that she had been so caught up in the idea of my father being happy and cared for that she had refused to see the truth. "I let him down," she said, her eyes full of tears. "And I let you down. Can you ever forgive me?" "Forgiveness is a process, Aunt Susan," I said honestly, "but I'm willing to start it. You're the only family I have left." We started having dinner once a month. It was slow. We were rebuilding years of broken trust. But it was a start. She would tell me stories about my dad when he was a boy, stories I had never heard before. And in sharing those memories, we started to find our way back to each other. One evening, about a year after the court hearing, I was looking through some old bank statements of my father's that Mr. Peterson had sent over. It was the final paperwork, closing out the estate. I was just glancing through them when a line item caught my eye. It was a series of monthly payments to a nursing home in another state. The payments had been going on for years, and they had stopped the month my father died. I didn't recognize the name of the facility. Curious, I looked it up online. It was an expensive, high-end assisted living facility. I called the main number. "I'm calling about a former resident," I said to the woman who answered. "I believe my father was handling her financial affairs." I gave her the name that was on the statements. It was a name I didn't know. "Ah, yes," the woman said. "A lovely lady. She passed away a few months ago, shortly after her son stopped making the payments." My blood ran cold. "Her son?" I asked. "Yes," the woman said. "He was so devoted. Paid for her care for years. Let me see. Yes, her son was Mark Parker." I hung up the phone, my mind reeling. My father didn't have a mother in a nursing home. My grandparents had passed away years ago. Who was this woman? And then, a horrible, sickening thought began to form in my mind. I searched for the woman's name online. And then I added another name to the search, Carol's maiden name. There it was, an old newspaper article, a birth announcement from 50 years ago. The woman in the nursing home was Carol's mother. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying certainty. My father had been paying for Carol's mother's care for years. It was a huge expense. The arguments Martha had overheard, they weren't just about my inheritance. They were about this. Carol was draining my father's finances to support her own family, and he was starting to push back. The new will, the new insurance policy, it wasn't just about greed. It was about securing her future and her mother's future. When my father died, the payments would stop, unless she got control of all the money. Then she could continue to pay for her mother's care. But the woman had died anyway. Carol's desperate, cruel plan had been for nothing. This new knowledge changed everything. It recontextualized her desperation. It wasn't just a simple act of greed. It was a calculated, long-term financial drain that had culminated in a final, desperate power grab. She hadn't just tried to steal from me. She had been bleeding my father dry for years. I felt a fresh wave of rage, colder and deeper than before. I thought about telling someone, Mr. Peterson, Aunt Susan. But what would be the point? The case was closed. The estate was settled. Carol was gone from my life. Revealing this new information would only open old wounds. It would mean more legal battles, more pain. And for what? To punish her further? She had already lost. She had lost the house, the money, the reputation she had tried so hard to build. She had lost everything. I decided to keep this final, ugly secret to myself. It was the last piece of the puzzle, the one that showed the true depth of her deception. And it was a burden I would carry alone. It was a final, grim reminder of the woman my father had trusted, and the price he had paid for that trust. I closed the laptop. I walked over to the window and looked out at the garden. The sunflowers I had planted were in full bloom, their faces turned towards the sun. The house was quiet. It was peaceful. It was mine. Carol had tried to steal my past and my future. She had tried to rewrite my father's legacy, but I had stopped her. I had taken back my home, my inheritance, and my father's memory. And in doing so, I had found my own strength. I was no longer the scared girl hiding in the attic. I was the woman of the house. And I was finally, truly, at peace. The years passed. The sharp edges of the grief and the anger began to soften. The house became a place of comfort, not conflict. I hosted holidays there. Sarah and her family would come for Thanksgiving. Aunt Susan and I would decorate the Christmas tree together, just like she and my dad used to do. We filled the rooms with new laughter, new memories. I never heard from Carol again. I sometimes wondered what had happened to her. I imagined her living in a small apartment somewhere. Her life a shadow of the grand existence she had tried to steal. But I did not waste much time on the thought. She was a closed chapter, a ghost I had successfully exorcised from my life. One day, I was in the attic looking for an old suitcase. I stumbled upon the banker's box where I had first found the fraudulent insurance policy. Personal papers, my father had written on the side. I opened it, and on top of the old files was a small sealed envelope I had never noticed before. It was addressed to me in his handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was a letter. The date on it was from about a year before he died. "My dearest Amy," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I am gone. And it probably means that things have gotten complicated. I am writing this because I am worried. I am not as strong as I used to be, and I know that Carol is persuasive. I love her, but I know she sees the world differently than we do. She is worried about her future, and sometimes that worry makes her do things I don't agree with. I want you to know, no matter what any piece of paper says, that you are my world. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. This house, this life I built, it was always for you. It was your mother's legacy to you, and it is my legacy to you. I am afraid that I might not be strong enough to protect it for you in the end. I am getting tired. But you, my Amy, you are strong. You have your mother's fire and your own incredible spirit. If things are not as they should be, I need you to fight. Fight for this house. Fight for your future. Fight for what you know is right. Don't let anyone take away what is yours. Know that I am proud of you. Know that I love you more than words can say. And know that I will be watching over you. Always. All my love, Dad." I sat there on the dusty attic floor, the letter clutched in my hand, and I sobbed. I cried for the father I had lost. For the man who had known, on some level, what was happening to him. I cried for the fear and worry he must have carried in those final years. And I cried with a fierce, burning pride. He had known. He had trusted me. He had believed in my strength, even when I hadn't believed in it myself. I had not just been fighting for a house. I had been fulfilling his final wish. I had been the daughter he had raised me to be. Strong, resilient, unbreakable. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my pocket. I would keep it with me always. It was the final, most important piece of my inheritance. It was his love, his faith, his blessing, and it was worth more than all the money in the world. I walked down from the attic and out into the backyard. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I looked at the house, my house, standing strong and secure. I had done it. I had saved his legacy. I had saved our home. And in the quiet of that evening, I could almost hear him whisper, "Well done, Amy. Well done." Life continued its steady forward march. I met someone. His name was Ben, and he was kind and funny, with a smile that reminded me a little of my dad's. He was a carpenter, and he loved the old house as much as I did. He saw the good bones, the history, the love that had been poured into its foundation. When I told him the story of what had happened with Carol, he listened patiently, his hand holding mine. He wasn't shocked or judgmental. He was just angry on my behalf. "You're a warrior," he said when I was finished. "You fought for your family. There is no greater honor than that." He helped me with projects around the house. We refinished the hardwood floors. We rebuilt the back deck. We turned the dusty garage into his workshop. With every nail he hammered, with every board he sawed, it felt like he was helping me build a new future on the foundations of the past. One day, he found the half-finished bookshelf my dad had been making for me. "Can I finish this?" he asked. "It seems like a shame to leave it undone." I watched as he carefully sanded the wood, secured the joints, and applied a fresh coat of stain. When he was finished, it was beautiful, strong and sturdy. He carried it into the living room and placed it by the fireplace. "A gift from your dad," he said, "and from me." We got married in the backyard, under the shade of the big oak tree my father had planted when I was born. It was a small ceremony, with just our closest friends and family. Sarah was my maid of honor. Aunt Susan cried through the whole thing. As Ben and I said our vows, I felt a profound sense of peace. I was starting my own family, in the home where my family had begun. It was a perfect circle. A few years later, the sound of children's laughter filled the halls of the old house. We had a daughter, Lily, who had my eyes and my dad's smile. Then a son, Sam, who was quiet and observant, just like Ben. I would tell them stories about their grandpa Mark. I would show them pictures from the old albums. I wanted them to know the man he was, not the weakened version Carol had tried to control, but the strong, loving father who had taught me how to ride a bike and who had written me a letter telling me to be brave. One afternoon, I was watching Lily and Sam play in the backyard. Lily was trying to climb the oak tree, her small face set with determination. Sam was watching her, ready to offer a helping hand if she slipped. They were a team. They had each other's backs. I thought about the legacy my father had left me. It wasn't just a house. It was a lesson. A lesson about fighting for what is right, about protecting the people you love, about the strength that can be found in the face of injustice. It was a legacy I was now passing on to my own children. They would grow up in this house, surrounded by love and security. They would know that this was their safe place, a home built on a foundation of resilience and truth. I never forgot what Carol had done. The memory was a scar, a reminder of how quickly things could be taken away if you were not vigilant. But it was no longer an open wound. It was a part of my story, the chapter that had taught me how to be a fighter. And as I sat there, watching my children play in the golden afternoon light, I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I had given my father the one thing he had wanted most. I had ensured that his legacy was not one of sadness and betrayal, but one of love, strength, and family. His story didn't end with Carol. It was continuing, right here, in the happy, noisy, beautiful life I had built. And it was a story that was far from over.